Have you ever stood in the silence that follows betrayal, that aching, suspended moment when your trust has been shattered not by an enemy, but by someone you once let close? A friend, a partner, a mentor. It doesn't just sting, it fractures something inside of you. You question not only them but yourself. How did you miss the signs? What part of you allowed that kind of access? In that spiral, something more dangerous begins, the erosion of your self-worth. You've likely been told that forgiveness is always noble, that to let go of the pain, you must offer grace even to those who have never earned it. But the Stoics saw betrayal differently. Not as something to be washed away by forced kindness, but as a moment to gain clarity. Betrayal reveals truth. It shows you what someone values and what you must protect. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress your pain, but to channel it into wisdom, into boundary, into inner freedom. This philosophy, born in the chaos of ancient Rome and matured through war, exile, and suffering, teaches you to respond, not react. It teaches you to walk away, not in bitterness, but in strength. In this video, you'll explore 8 forms of betrayal that you should never ignore, never excuse, and never allow twice. Not because you're vengeful, but because you are finally awake. You'll be guided by the insights of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, men who understood human weakness intimately, and by the lens of modern psychology, which shows how unresolved betrayal can shape your entire emotional landscape. You'll hear about public figures who, like you, have faced deception, abandonment, and manipulation, and how they chose not to let that betrayal define them. Most importantly, you'll discover not only what to walk away from, but what to walk toward: your dignity, your self-respect, and your unshakable calm. Let's begin. Part 1. When loyalty becomes a lie, you usually feel it before you fully understand it. The discomfort begins as a whisper, a sense that something isn't right, though you can't quite say why. A pause in a friend's voice, a shift in how they look at you or how they don't, the subtle withdrawal of warmth that used to feel effortless. You catch it in the gaps, the silence after a vulnerable moment, the hesitation before they speak your name with pride, the absence of your defense when you're not there to speak for yourself. That's the first betrayal of loyalty, not in action, but in presence. Loyalty begins to vanish not when someone walks away, but when they stop standing beside you in the invisible ways that matter most. The Stoics had little patience for pretenders. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminds you to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. But what happens when those closest to you hold themselves to no such standard? What happens when they claim loyalty with their words, but their actions leak small betrayals, not loud enough to accuse, but constant enough to erode your trust? Loyalty, you come to realize, is not a pledge made in comfort. It's the decision someone makes when you're at your worst, and they still choose to stay aligned with you, not out of convenience, but out of character. The betrayal of loyalty hurts not because of what's lost, but because of what was assumed. You believed in something mutual, something safe. There was an unspoken agreement. I'll protect your name in rooms where you're absent. I'll keep your secrets close. I'll choose you even when no one's watching. But betrayal turns that agreement into a private joke, one only you seem to have taken seriously. And the pain that follows isn't just disappointment, it's disorientation. You begin to question your own judgment. Was I wrong to trust them? Did I misread their character? Or worse, was I too desperate to believe in the bond? Epictetus warned against placing your peace in the hands of others. Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it, he wrote. Personal merit cannot be derived from an external source. But betrayal isn't just about admiration, it's about shared identity. When someone you love and trust begins to falter in their loyalty, they don't just let you down, they force you to re-examine who you are in their eyes. And when that image no longer matches who you believed you were together, something in you fractures. Modern psychology has a name for this kind of dissonance: relational trauma. It happens not through physical violence or overt abuse, but through the breakdown of attachment, the betrayal of emotional safety. The slow poisoning of trust in intimate relationships. A friend who talks behind your back, a partner who makes private jokes about you in public, a sibling who sides with outsiders instead of protecting the bond you thought was sacred. These betrayals don't leave bruises. They leave you doubting whether you were ever truly seen or just temporarily useful. Look at the story of whistleblower Frances Hodgkin, who exposed Facebook's internal practices and data suppression. Hodgkin had once been a trusted insider, a person within the system, loyal to the mission. But when she saw that loyalty to the company meant turning a blind eye to harm, she chose to break that loyalty in the name of integrity. Her actions sparked a global reckoning. Why? Because they highlighted the painful truth that loyalty, when misused, becomes complicity. Sometimes what appears as betrayal is actually moral clarity, and other times, what feels like loyalty is actually a slow erosion of your values. Stoicism teaches that your highest loyalty should always be to your character, not your relationships, not your social group, not your reputation, your character. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Wasted time often looks like misplaced loyalty, staying too long in spaces where your name is no longer safe, where your soul is no longer met with care, where your presence is tolerated rather than valued. So how do you respond when loyalty begins to fracture? The answer is not always confrontation. Sometimes it's observation. You pay attention not to what they say, but to what they fail to say. Do they advocate for you in hard moments or disappear? Do they bring your name into sacred spaces with reverence, or do they trade your trust for status? The Stoics believed that you cannot control others, only your response. But that does not mean tolerating harm. It means choosing wisely where to invest your energy, your trust, your heart. The practical application here is simple, though not easy. Protect your standards. Do not let someone's past version of loyalty buy permanent access to your life. People evolve, and so should your boundaries. Loyalty, real loyalty, must be re-earned through action, not assumed through history. Give yourself permission to let go of people who no longer show up with the same depth they once did. You are not cruel for doing so. You are clear. You don't need vengeance. You don't need a grand explanation. You only need to return to the question Marcus Aurelius asked himself daily: is this essential? If the loyalty you once shared is no longer essential, if it has become a lie dressed as friendship, as partnership, as family, then the Stoic response is to release it with dignity. Not bitterness, not resentment, but clarity. Because in the end, loyalty is not about permanence, it's about presence. And when that presence turns hollow, it is no longer loyalty at all. Part 2: the silent cost of manipulation. Not all betrayal feels like war. Sometimes it arrives like peace. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't break you openly, it slowly bends you in ways you don't notice until one day you no longer recognize the shape of your own self. This is the nature of manipulation, quiet, calculated, and cloaked in the illusion of care. It wears the mask of affection, of concern, of partnership, but underneath, it's an erosion not of your defenses, but of your clarity. Marcus Aurelius warned in Meditations, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But manipulation alters your thoughts from the outside in. It begins subtly, a little guilt when you say no, a sideways glance when you speak up, a suggestion that you're too sensitive, too dramatic, or too nighty. At first, you brush it off. You assume they mean well. You want to believe in the best version of them, because doing so helps you avoid the discomfort of confrontation. But over time, that discomfort grows inward. You begin second-guessing yourself. You hesitate before expressing disagreement. You shrink your needs to make the other person comfortable, and little by little your own intuition becomes the enemy. Seneca once said, "He who does not know what the world is does not know where he is." Manipulation disorients you exactly like that. It pulls you into a world of false agreements, places where your consent is assumed, your silence is taken as approval, and your emotional labor is extracted in the name of love or loyalty. You may not even realize you're being manipulated because there's no single explosion, only a long series of concessions. You give an inch, then another, then a mile, and by the time you look up, you're no longer living in your own values. You're orbiting someone else's emotional gravity. Modern psychology calls this process gaslighting. It's when someone causes you to doubt your own perception, feelings, or memory, often to maintain control. The manipulator's power doesn't come from strength, it comes from your confusion. They win not by overpowering you, but by making you question whether you're even allowed to feel hurt. And this betrayal is not just about trust, it's about identity. Because when you stop trusting yourself, you lose your center. You become dependent on the very person who's disorienting you. It's a brutal emotional paradox. The more they undermine your clarity, the more you seek their validation to get it back. Consider the story of Britney Spears. For over a decade, her life was governed by a legal conservatorship, a structure originally meant to protect her, but which ultimately became a tool of manipulation. Those closest to her framed their control as love, decisions about her finances, a career, even her bodily autonomy were made without her full consent. All the while, the narrative painted her as unstable, incapable, and fragile, reinforcing the very system that kept her powerless. And yet, from the outside, everything looked composed, clean, legal, but the betrayal wasn't just legal, it was emotional. It told her she could not be trusted with herself. That's what manipulation always does. It convinces you that you need the other person to function, that you are broken without them. But Stoicism calls you back to something deeper. Epictetus reminds you no man is free who is not master of himself, and you cannot be master of yourself while someone else is scripting your reality, deciding which parts of your feelings are valid, which needs are acceptable, and which boundaries are too much. So what can you do when you suspect you're being manipulated, not overtly, but silently, subtly? You return to your perception. The Stoics taught that perception is the first power you must guard. What does your body say when you're around this person? Do you feel smaller, less sure, vaguely guilty even when you've done nothing wrong? That feeling is information. It's not paranoia, it's the signal that something is misaligned. That signal matters more than the manipulator's soothing words. Next, you name it, not to them necessarily, but to yourself. Name the behavior. Write it down, say it aloud. They are making me doubt what I know I felt. They're using affection to override my boundaries. They twist my needs into guilt. Naming creates distance. It gives you back your vision. As Marcus Aurelius taught, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment of it, and you have the power to revoke that judgment. But awareness alone is not enough. You must act. This doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes the most stoic response is simply withdrawing your attention. You stop justifying yourself. You stop over-explaining. You stop engaging in emotional negotiations that only leave you more entangled. You become still. You become clear. And in that clarity, the manipulator loses their hold. Remember, manipulation only works on those who abandon their own judgment. And you now are reclaiming it. You are remembering that your thoughts are your own, that your emotions are signals, not flaws, that your boundaries are not burdens, but bridges to your peace. In the end, Stoicism isn't just about enduring difficulty. It's about not letting anyone else define what difficulty means. Betrayal doesn't always arrive loudly, but once you learn to listen deeply to your breath, your instinct, You're disquiet, you begin to hear the cost of manipulation long before it becomes visible. And when you hear it, you no longer have to wait to be broken. You can choose to walk away whole. Part 3. When deception becomes a habit, not a mistake. There's a distinct kind of pain that comes when someone lies to your face and does it with ease. A sinking in your chest, a heat in your cheeks, a rising question that won't leave you alone. Why didn't they just tell me the truth? But the more important question is one the Stoics would urge you to ask. What does this lie reveal about their character and about your own boundaries? To the Stoic mind, deception isn't just a moral failing, it's a sign of inner chaos. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." Truth is the scaffolding of Stoic life. It is what you use to build integrity, relationships, and peace of mind. When someone lies to you, they are tearing down that structure, not only in your shared reality, but in your internal world. Modern psychology frames repeated deception as a form of betrayal trauma, the emotional injury caused when someone you rely on violates fundamental expectations. It's not just the lie that hurts, it's the erosion of certainty. You begin to question your ability to discern truth. You question how much of the relationship was ever real, and perhaps most painfully, you begin to doubt your own perception, a destabilization that can ripple into every aspect of your life. Consider the public unraveling of Lance Armstrong's career. For years, he was a symbol of resilience, the cancer survivor who returned to dominate the world of cycling, inspiring millions. But beneath the surface was a pattern of deception so elaborate, it not only shattered his legacy, but deeply wounded those who believed in him. Teammates, sponsors, fans, they weren't just betrayed by his doping. They were betrayed by the confidence with which he denied it, and by the cruelty with which he attacked those who dared to speak the truth. Armstrong's downfall wasn't a single lie, it was a lifestyle of deception. And the Stoics would point to this not as a unique case, but as a universal lesson. When someone lies and continues to lie, you are not dealing with an error. You are dealing with an identity. That's the crux of it. Habitual deception isn't a lapse, it's a signal. A person who lies repeatedly is telling you without words that they prefer illusion to integrity. And if you allow that into your life, you will become an accomplice in your own disorientation. You'll justify, minimize, and rationalize, not because you're naive, but because you're loyal. But here's the Stoic truth. Your loyalty is wasted on those who cannot be loyal to truth itself. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by things, but by our perception of things. When deception occurs, your perception must shift. You cannot unsee what a lie reveals. You cannot restore innocence to a relationship that has been strategically misrepresented. And most of all, you cannot be at peace while living in someone else's false narrative. So what do you do when faced with deceit? First, you anchor in your own clarity. Begin by affirming what you know to be true. Write it down, say it aloud. Truth loses power when hidden, but regains it when spoken. Then resist the urge to extract honesty from someone committed to lies. You don't need their confession, you need your courage. Walk away not in anger, but in resolve. As Seneca wrote, he who does not prevent a crime when he can, encourages it. In practice, this may look like letting a deceptive friend drift away without drama. It may mean ending a relationship the moment trust is fractured beyond repair. It may mean holding yourself to a higher standard of honesty in your own life, even when it's uncomfortable, because you know the cost of falsehood. And here's the deeper work: forgive yourself for being deceived. The Stoics never claimed to be invulnerable to pain. They simply refused to let pain make them bitter or blind. You are not weak for believing someone you loved. You are wise for choosing not to believe them again. Truth is not just a virtue, it is your anchor. And once you reclaim it, you no longer need to cling to anyone who cannot speak it. You step into a new kind of stillness, one where you no longer tolerate distortion, because your self-respect finally outweighs your fear of loss. Part 4: The betrayal of emotional abandonment. Not all betrayals make noise. Some arrive in silence. They don't come as affairs or lies or dramatic exits, but as neglect, absence, a cold shoulder in the moment you most needed warmth. You turn to someone you love, a partner, a parent, a close friend, and find nothing. No support, no presence, no care, just distance where connection used to be. This is emotional abandonment, when someone chooses disengagement over empathy, withdrawal over presence. And while it's harder to name than disloyalty or deceit, its impact runs just as deep, sometimes deeper. The Stoics were not strangers to isolation. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations alone in war camps, often surrounded by people who obeyed him but did not understand him. He knew what it meant to feel unsupported, even while technically accompanied. But he also knew this: look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. Stoicism teaches you that while others may withdraw from you, you are never required to abandon yourself. Modern psychology calls this kind of betrayal an attachment rupture. It's the kind of trauma that doesn't come from what was done, but from what was withheld: affection, attention, validation, protection. When it happens in childhood, it forms a blueprint teaching you that love is conditional, presence is unpredictable, and your needs are too much. When it happens in adulthood, it can reawaken that same old script, making you feel small, unseen, and quietly broken. But what Stoicism offers is not despair. It offers a return to yourself. Consider the life of Adele. At the peak of her fame, while the world sang her lyrics, she was quietly navigating a divorce and the emotional fallout of a relationship that, as she later described, left her feeling alone even while in it. In interviews, she spoke of how hard it was to leave, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she had internalized the idea that being emotionally abandoned was just something strong women tolerate. But what she eventually embraced was precisely Stoic, that the absence of care is not something to endure indefinitely. It is something to outgrow. This is where the Stoic teaching of autarkeia, self-sufficiency, becomes vital. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is content with himself." That doesn't mean you stop needing others, but that you stop relying on those who consistently fail to show up. You learn to recognize that someone's emotional absence isn't about you being unworthy. It's about them being unequipped or unwilling. And either way, you do not have to remain in the waiting room of their avoidance. What does this look like in practice? It starts with acknowledging the hurt without minimizing it. Emotional neglect is harm. Your pain is valid, but from there you shift focus inward. You stop chasing emotional crumbs and start building emotional sovereignty. That means creating space in your life for people who see you, hear you, and stand with you, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. More importantly, it means you show up for yourself in the moments others don't. When you're anxious, you breathe instead of berating yourself. When you're grieving, you allow it instead of pushing it away. When you're joyful, you celebrate it without needing anyone else's permission. This is how you repair the internal abandonment that external betrayal may have triggered. And then comes the hardest part: setting new expectations, not for perfection, but for presence. If someone repeatedly ghosts you emotionally, especially when you're vulnerable, you must ask, is this a relationship or just a habit? Stoicism demands that you do not cling to what diminishes you. You don't need a screaming match. You don't even need closure. You need to stop offering access to someone who treats your emotions like a burden. As Epictetus reminds you, you are a soul carrying a corpse. That's how powerful you are. Your emotions, your depth. Your inner world, they are sacred, and anyone who consistently ignores them is not just busy or distracted. They are misaligned with your values, and that, in Stoic terms, is enough reason to step away. Let them misunderstand you. Let them think you're cold for walking away. You'll know the truth, that your decision was not made in bitterness, but in strength. That your healing did not come from being rescued, but from finally rescuing yourself. And that the greatest loyalty you'll ever find is the one you rebuild with your own soul, one presence, one breath, one choice at a time. Part 5, the betrayal of envy disguised as friendship. There's a certain kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with knives or silence. It arrives with a smile. It masquerades as support. It cloaks itself in compliments, nods, applause. But behind it lies a quiet resentment, a slow-burning envy, a hidden wish for your downfall. This is the betrayal of false friendship, when someone stays close not to lift you, but to watch you stumble. And when that betrayal unfolds, it's not just painful, it's disorienting, because you weren't attacked, you were admired, then undermined. Stoicism reminds you to be careful not just with your enemies, but with your inner circle. As Marcus Aurelius cautioned, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And when you surround yourself with people who secretly resent your joy, your growth, or your success, that dye slowly bleeds into your sense of self. You start shrinking your light, you downplay your wins. You become smaller not because they asked you to, but because you feared what your fullness might provoke. Modern psychology has a name for this pattern: relational envy. It's not the kind that shouts, "I hate you." It whispers, "Why not me?" It shows up when your friend hesitates to celebrate your promotion, when your sibling subtly reminds you of your past every time you take a leap, when someone consistently brings up your flaws the moment you shine too brightly. Envy doesn't always destroy relationships from the outside, it erodes them from within. Consider the story of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Their relationship was a turbulent one, built on passion, talent, and mutual admiration, but also envy. While Diego was the more established painter early on, Frida's art eventually eclipsed his in both originality and emotional depth, rather than championing her evolution. Diego became increasingly dismissive and critical. It wasn't just romantic betrayal that tore at their bond, it was envy wrapped in artistic critique and false praise. Frida's brilliance threatened the very person who once claimed to adore it. In your life, you may not be married to another artist, but you've likely felt the sting of this betrayal. A so-called friend who shows up when you're struggling but disappears when you're doing well. The colleague who's kind when you're behind, cold when you're ahead. The partner who claims to love you but flinches every time you grow into more of yourself. This isn't love, it's attachment laced with competition. Epictetus taught, the flourishing life cannot be achieved until we moderate our desires and see how little is truly needed. People consumed by envy live in a state of lack, and when you tether your emotional safety to their approval, you're allowing their scarcity mindset to infect your own self-concept. The solution is not confrontation, it's separation, not all at once, but gently with clarity. Because while you may wish to lift others as you rise, not everyone wants to rise with you. Some would rather you stay small so they can remain comfortable. The Stoic approach here is simple: judge people by their patterns, not their promises. Someone who consistently makes you feel insecure in your joy is not a safe presence, no matter how long you've known them. And someone who cannot genuinely celebrate your growth is not your friend, they are a spectator waiting for a fall. So how do you protect yourself from this betrayal? First, you cultivate discernment. Practice noticing how you feel after spending time with someone. Are you energized or depleted? Do you feel expanded or subtly ashamed? Your nervous system knows before your mind catches up. Listen to it. Second, stop over-explaining your joy. Not everyone deserves access to your dreams or your progress. Your light does not need justification. And finally, choose friendships aligned with your values, not your history. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." That doesn't mean perfect people, it means honest people. People who are secure enough in themselves to cheer for you without flinching. People whose love isn't performative but anchored in genuine admiration. Let go of the illusion that everyone close to you is rooting for you. That's not cynicism, it's wisdom. And when you act on that wisdom, you make space for a truer kind of friendship, one where celebration isn't suspicious, one where support doesn't come with strings, one where you can finally breathe fully and unapologetically. You don't have to forgive envy disguised as loyalty. You simply have to outgrow it, and in doing so, you will not only protect your peace, you will reclaim the joy of being fully seen. Part 6, the betrayal of manipulation masquerading as love. Some betrayals aren't obvious. They don't involve cheating, lying, or leaving. In fact, they often come dressed as devotion. Kind words, constant attention, sacrifice. At first, it feels like you've found someone who truly cares, someone who sees you, cherishes you, gives without asking. But slowly, their care becomes currency. Their affection turns conditional. They withdraw it when you don't agree. They guilt you when you assert your needs. They keep score. This is not love. It is control wrapped in affection. And to the Stoics, it is one of the most dangerous forms of betrayal because it tricks you into giving up your freedom willingly. Epictetus warned against this very dynamic when he said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." Stoicism isn't about blaming the victim. It's about recognizing where your agency begins. Manipulation can only thrive when you lose sight of your inner compass, when you start reacting instead of choosing, when someone else's emotions become more important than your values. And once you hand them that power, it becomes a quiet prison, a place where you learn to abandon yourself in order to keep the peace. Modern psychology calls this emotional coercion or covert narcissism. It's manipulation that doesn't rage, it gaslights. It doesn't command, it subtly rewrites your reality. It uses phrases like "I did this for you," or "I just love you too much," or "you're being ungrateful," not to connect, but to control. It's especially potent in romantic relationships and family systems, where love is supposed to be unconditional. But when love becomes a tool for domination, the betrayal isn't just relational, it's spiritual. You begin to doubt your instincts. You learn to confuse fear with loyalty. Consider the story of Britney Spears. For over a decade, she lived under a conservatorship led by her own father, a legal arrangement that dictated her finances, her decisions, even her personal freedom. Publicly, it was framed as protection, a way to help her through mental health struggles. But as the years passed, it became clear this was not about care, it was about control. Her autonomy had been stripped in the name of love, and though she smiled in public, behind the scenes she was fighting to reclaim her voice. Stoicism teaches that your soul, your hegemonikon, the ruling faculty of your mind, is the only thing that truly belongs to you. Anyone who tries to claim it, twist it, or bend it for their own comfort is not your ally. They are your captor, no matter how gentle their tone. Seneca reminds you no man is free who is a slave to his passions, but that includes the passions of others. When someone manipulates you into guilt, fear, or shame to get what they want, they are weaponizing your empathy against you. So what does it look like to break free from this kind of betrayal? First, you must name it. That means dropping the euphemisms. It's not "they're just intense," or "they mean well," or "I'm too sensitive." It's emotional manipulation. Period. The Stoics urge clarity, not confusion, and clarity begins with accurate naming. Second, you reclaim your agency. You stop reacting to every guilt trip. You begin making decisions based on principles, not pressure. Ask yourself, would I still make this choice if they weren't upset with me? If the answer is no, you're being coerced, not loved. Finally, you set limits and enforce them, not with cruelty, but with calm certainty. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. You don't need to manipulate back. You simply need to stop participating. Withdraw your compliance, step out of the dance. You'll be called cold, selfish, ungrateful. Let them speak." The Stoics didn't measure virtue by how others felt about them. They measured it by whether they remained aligned with reason, dignity, and truth. And here's the truth. Real love does not demand the sacrifice of your inner freedom. It does not weaponize your compassion. It does not twist your clarity into confusion. If someone only loves you when you're easy to control, then they never loved you. They loved the version of you that made them comfortable. So let go, not in bitterness, but in strength. Refuse to be seduced by the illusion that manipulation is just complicated love. It's not. It's betrayal, and it must be treated as such. When you walk away from it, you don't just protect your boundaries. You rebuild your integrity. You remember that the most sacred relationship is the one you hold with yourself. And once you're loyal to that, no one can ever hold power over you again. Part 7, the betrayal of disrespect for your boundaries. There is a quiet kind of betrayal that many people overlook, not because it's subtle, but because it's become so normal. It doesn't always involve lies or even malice. It's when someone repeatedly ignores the limits you've clearly set, when they dismiss your no as negotiable, when they interrupt your silence, your time, your space, not because they need you, but because they feel entitled to you. This betrayal isn't loud, but it is corrosive. It erodes your sense of sovereignty. It teaches you that you must be constantly available to earn love, that you don't own your time or your energy or your peace, but you do. And when someone refuses to recognize that, they are not being loving, they are being disrespectful. The Stoics were clear on this. Epictetus taught you must protect your own mind. If someone were to hand over your body to a passerby, you would be outraged, yet you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along. He's talking about boundaries. When you don't guard your mind, your attention, your emotional energy, people will walk through it as if it's a public road. And they'll call it love, they'll call it closeness, but it's not love if it doesn't respect your limits. Modern psychology affirms this idea through the framework of boundary theory. A boundary is not a wall, it's a bridge with a gate. It allows connection, but only with consent. Unhealthy relationships confuse enmeshment with intimacy. They make you feel guilty for needing space, for saying no, for pulling back. But healthy love honors your individuality. It doesn't collapse into your life like a wave. It arrives like a guest, respectful, present, and aware of when to leave. You've seen this in your life, haven't you? The friend who always calls in crisis but never asks how you're doing. The partner who gets offended when you want time alone. The family member who insists that family means everything, even if it means trampling over your well-being. These are not small violations. They are deep betrayals because they challenge the very thing Stoicism defends most fiercely, your autonomy. Think of the late actor Robin Williams. A man beloved by millions, he was the emotional center of every room he entered. Friends, colleagues, strangers, everyone expected his joy, his energy, his availability. But behind that was a man slowly exhausted by constant emotional performance. His boundaries were dissolved by the weight of being always on. His death left the world in grief, but it also left us with a brutal lesson. When you're not allowed to protect your inner world, it will eventually collapse. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, often reminded himself to keep his ruling faculty inviolable. He knew that his role as emperor exposed him to constant demands, but he also knew this truth: no one can demand your soul. No one deserves your peace as a sacrifice to their comfort. So how do you reclaim your boundaries without guilt? First, you define them clearly, not as punishments to others, but as promises to yourself. You say, this is how I protect my energy. This is what I need to remain whole. That might look like not answering texts past a certain hour, or refusing to engage in arguments that go nowhere, or limiting time with people who constantly drain you. Second, you enforce those boundaries without apology. The Stoics believed in justice not as vengeance but as right action, and it is just to honor your own needs even when others don't understand. You do not need their agreement to uphold your limit. You only need your own clarity. And third, you let go of relationships that only function when you abandon yourself. Seneca wrote, withdraw into yourself as far as you can. That doesn't mean isolation. It means you must live from the inside out, not the outside in. When someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries, what they are saying is, your needs are less important than my comfort. That is not love. That is dominance. And it is not something you need to forgive. By choosing to uphold your boundaries, you're not pushing people away. You're inviting in only those who can truly respect your presence. You're saying, I am not here to be consumed. I am here to connect deeply, honestly, and without self-betrayal. This is how you build unshakable calm, not by pleasing everyone, but by refusing to betray yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Your boundaries are sacred. Defend them like your peace depends on it, because it does. Part 8. The betrayal of repeated patterns. When they show you who they are, believe them. There's a betrayal that doesn't come as a shock, but as a slow and painful realization. It's not the first lie, the first broken promise, or the first moment of disrespect. It's the third or the fifth or the 10th. And this betrayal doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from your own hope that they'll change. You want to believe the apology. You want to believe that this time will be different. But the truth is, when someone shows you who they are consistently, they are not confusing. You are refusing to see. The Stoics never told you to expect perfection from others. They told you to expect patterns. As Epictetus put it, when someone acts unjustly, ask not why did they do that, but what are they trying to gain? This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. And it asks something very difficult of you, to stop loving people for their potential and start seeing them for their behavior. Forgiving once may be strength, but forgiving the same betrayal over and over is self-abandonment. Modern psychology has a name for this: trauma bonding. It's what happens when emotional highs and lows, love followed by pain, affection followed by withdrawal, create an addictive loop in your nervous system. You mistake anxiety for passion. You confuse inconsistency with depth, and slowly you begin to see this chaos as normal, even necessary. You aren't weak for falling into this pattern. Your brain is wired for connection, but without boundaries it will settle for whatever love looks like, even if it comes with a price tag of emotional destruction. Look at the life of Whitney Houston, a world-class voice, a once-in-a-generation talent, and yet behind the scenes, a woman trapped in cycles of betrayal, not just from others, but from her own attachment to those who consistently harmed her. People around her kept saying she'll get better, she's just going through a phase, or she means well. But what they missed was the pattern, the repetition that screamed louder than any promise. And by the time they listened, it was too late. Seneca warned that a long-standing vice acquires the force of nature. In other words, when someone repeats the same harmful behavior long enough, they stop pretending. The mask drops. What you're left with is not someone who made a mistake, but someone who made a choice, again and again. So what do you do when you see this? When the evidence is overwhelming, but your heart still wants to believe the best in them, you return to the Stoic center. You ask, what is in my control? You cannot control whether someone learns, grows, or changes. You can only control whether you stay in the same room while they continue their pattern. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That strength begins with observation. Watch what people do, not what they say. Listen not just to their words, but to the emotional climate they create in your life. If you constantly feel anxious, depleted, or small around someone, that is not a healthy bond. That is a warning. Then comes acceptance. This is the hardest part because it requires the death of a fantasy. You stop waiting for them to become the version of themselves that exists only in your imagination. You accept them as they are, not to judge them, but to free yourself. And finally, you act. You draw a line that says, I will not betray myself by waiting for you to stop betraying me. That might mean ending a relationship, or creating distance, or simply changing the terms of engagement, not out of revenge, but out of respect for yourself and for the truth. You are not cold for recognizing patterns. You are not heartless for choosing to walk away. In fact, you are doing what the Stoics trained their minds to do, to see things clearly and to act accordingly, because clarity is not cruelty. It is compassion for the future version of yourself who deserves peace. So remember this, a single mistake is human, but a repeated betrayal is a message, and when you receive that message, you have a choice, not to fix them, not to fight them, but to free yourself. Conclusion: only the unshakable can love without being broken. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Marcus Aurelius wrote those words not for others, but as a reminder to himself that real strength lies not in what you preach, but in what you practice, especially when it hurts. And betrayal, more than any other wound, tests that practice. It tempts you toward bitterness. It whispers that vulnerability is weakness, that trust is naive. But Stoicism gives you a different option. It doesn't ask you to become hard or cold. It asks you to become clear. You've seen how betrayal wears many faces: manipulation dressed as love, abandonment disguised as busyness, repetition excused as forgiveness, and silence used as control. You've seen how betrayal isn't just what they did to you, it's also what you allowed, tolerated, or explained away in yourself. And that realization, while painful, is also your turning point, because once you see clearly, you can choose consciously. You can choose not to carry resentment, but also not to offer unearned trust. You can choose boundaries without shutting down your heart. You can remain open without becoming exposed. This is the paradox of Stoic love. You are allowed to care deeply while protecting your peace fiercely. You can walk away without hate. You can forgive silently without ever returning. You can let go. Not to punish the other, but to preserve the part of you they could never truly see. So here's your final reminder: never confuse being calm with being passive. Your calm is earned. It is carved from loss, from wisdom, from waking up one morning and deciding that you will no longer betray yourself on behalf of others, that you will live with eyes open, heart intact, and mind clear. Apply what you've learned today. Reflect on the betrayals that have shaped you, not to relive them, but to reclaim them. Journal your boundaries. Speak your truth with kindness but firmness. And above all, remember, your healing is your responsibility, not theirs, yours. If this message resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What have you learned to never forgive, not out of anger, but out of self-respect? Let's grow together as modern Stoics in an often chaotic world. And if you found value in this, consider subscribing to Unshakable Calm, where we explore the philosophy of inner strength, clarity, and peace. Because in a world full of noise, betrayal, and confusion, calm isn't just a mood, it's a decision. And you are strong enough to make it.